I saw the calendar invite at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. My husband had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, something he never did anymore. He used to work in the living room with me, both of us on our laptops while something played in the background. Then about 8 months ago, he started closing his office door. I told myself it was because he had more responsibility. He had been promoted to VP of Operations at the firm 6 months earlier, a promotion I'd quietly helped engineer by introducing him to the right people at the right time. I didn't think about it much. That's what you do when you love someone. But that night, I wasn't snooping. I was just walking past to get a glass of water. The screen was bright and his email was open and the calendar invite was right there at the top. Weekend retreat. Ashford Estate Inn. October 14th to 16th. 2 guests. Panorama Suite. October 14th was my birthday. I stood there for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The ice maker clicked. I set down my glass very carefully because I didn't trust my hands. The invite was from someone named Justine at his office. I knew the name. He'd mentioned her once or twice. Someone on the operations side. Someone who handled vendor contracts. She's efficient, he'd said once, in the offhand way you describe a stapler. I hadn't thought about her since. I didn't wake him up. I didn't cry. I went back to bed and lay flat on my back, with my eyes open and thought very clearly about what I was going to do. That's the part people don't understand. How calm it was. How quiet. Like a door closing somewhere deep in my chest that I didn't even know had been open. My name is not important. What matters is that I was 38 years old, the founder and CEO of a boutique supply chain consulting firm I had built from a single client and a lot of nerve, and I had been married for 9 years to a man who, it turned out, had decided that my success made him feel small in a way that he chose to address by booking a weekend suite with a woman from his accounting team. We had no children. We had a dog, a rescue beagle named Harold, who slept at the foot of the bed and had no idea anything was wrong. We had a mortgage on a house in Raleigh that we'd bought together 3 years ago. We had joint accounts and a shared Netflix password and a therapist we'd seen twice, and then stopped going to because my husband said he didn't think we actually needed it. I had introduced him to every important person in his career, not because I felt obligated, because I loved him and I thought we were building something. I need you to understand what I was before I can tell you what I became. The next morning, I made coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen table like I did every morning. He was scrolling through his phone. He was wearing the gray Henley I'd bought him at a farmer's market in Asheville 2 Octobers ago. I watched his face and thought, he doesn't know that I know, and there was something almost clarifying about that. The way it stripped everything back to exactly what it was. I said, "What are you thinking for my birthday?" He looked up. He had the decency to look briefly uncertain before he smiled. "I was thinking maybe dinner, that Italian place you like." "Sure," I said. "Sounds good." I smiled. I poured more coffee. I went to my office and I called my attorney. Her name was Claudette. No, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a little. My attorney's name isn't relevant to what happened. What's relevant is what she told me, which was, don't move money, don't make accusations, don't let him know you know, document everything. And then she referred me to a forensic accountant named Dr. Ashby, a quiet man in his 60s who wore bow ties and said very little, but saw everything. I also called my best friend, who had disliked my husband for most of our marriage in the polite, measured way that good friends dislike people they can't say outright they dislike. She picked up on the first ring. I told her what I'd seen. There was a silence. "How are you?" she said. "I'm fine," I said. Another silence. Then, "Okay, what do we do?" That we nearly broke me. I had to press my lips together for a moment. "We wait," I said, "and we plan. Here's what Dr. Ashby found over the next 3 weeks, pulling through the financials I gave him access to. My husband had opened a secondary account 17 months earlier. Small transfers. Never more than $400 at a time. Always on Fridays when he knew I didn't check statements. Over 17 months, it added up to just over $22,000. Some of it, the accountant suspected, had gone toward what he described in his report as personal recreational expenses. The Ashford Estate Inn charged $640 a night for the panorama suite. I did not feel rage when I read that report. I felt something quieter and more dangerous, which I can only describe as focus. My husband was not a bad man in the dramatic sense. He hadn't hit me. He hadn't threatened me. He had done something that in some ways was worse. He had decided, somewhere along the way, that I was an obstacle to his own sense of importance, and he had slowly, methodically, built an exit without ever having the courage to tell me he wanted one. The gaslighting had been so gradual I hadn't even named it until I was looking at it from the outside. The way he'd started describing my work as stressful for both of us. The way he'd mentioned, twice, that one of his colleagues had a wife who'd stepped back from her career after they had kids. Must be nice, he'd said. More time to breathe. The way he'd started introducing me at his work events as my wife, in a tone that seemed to complete his sentence rather than begin it. I had let it go because I loved him, and I believe that people who love each other work things out. But that was before the calendar invite. I didn't cancel dinner reservations. I didn't change a single visible thing. I paid the mortgage on time. I attended his firm's quarterly social with him, and shook hands with people and laughed at jokes and watched Justine from across the room. She was pretty in an anxious way, eyes that kept moving. And I thought, she doesn't know what she's part of either. What I did instead, quietly, was this. I called my firm's attorney, a different one from my personal attorney, someone who handled corporate structure. I asked her to review my operating agreement and my IP ownership documentation. I asked her specifically if my business were ever to become relevant in a divorce proceeding, what would be vulnerable. She told me. I fixed it. Over 3 weeks, quietly and legally, I restructured several things that should have been restructured years ago, not to hide assets. Everything was documented. Everything was above board. But to make absolutely certain that what I had built was airtight in a way it hadn't been before. Then I called the Ashford Estate Inn. The woman who answered was cheerful and helpful. I explained that I was looking to make a reservation for the weekend of October 14th. She said they had availability. I asked specifically about the panorama suite. She said it was already reserved. I told her my name. I asked if there was any chance of an adjacent room. I was surprising my husband for his birthday, I explained, and I knew he'd booked the suite and I wanted to be close. Could she tell me which rooms shared a wall with the panorama suite? She was not supposed to tell me this. She told me anyway. People generally want to help with what sounds like a romantic story. I booked room 214. Then I called my best friend and told her what I'd done. There was a pause. "You're not going to do anything crazy," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," I said. "I'm going to do something correct." I also called my sister. She lived in Charlotte, 3 hours away, and she had met my husband twice at holidays and described him afterward as perfectly fine, which in her vocabulary was not a compliment. I asked if she would come. I told her why. She said, "Tell me when and I'll be there." The last call I made was to a woman named Irene, a client of mine who had become, over 5 years, something closer to a mentor. She was 71 years old, had built and sold 2 companies, and had been divorced once in her 40s from a man she described as a lovely person who needed to be someone's second husband, not mine. When I told her what was happening, she listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What do you need from me specifically?" I told her. She said, "I'll clear my calendar." The drive to the Ashford Estate Inn takes about 90 minutes from Raleigh. It's in the foothills, in a part of North Carolina that gets genuinely cold in October. All bare trees and gray sky and wood smoke from the inn's fireplaces. I had stayed there once before, early in our marriage, when everything had still felt like it was becoming something. I checked in on Friday afternoon, 2 hours before my husband arrived with her. My sister and Irene were with me. The woman at the front desk recognized my name from the phone call. I could see it in the small, careful way she handled my keycard, and said nothing except that she hoped we'd enjoy our stay. Room 214 was smaller than the panorama suite, but it had good light and a window seat that looked out over the grounds. My sister ordered room service. Irene sat in the armchair by the window and read something on her phone with the same composure she brought to everything. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. I heard them check in at 6:14 p.m. The walls were not especially thin, but the hallway carried sound. I heard his laugh, the particular laugh he used when he was performing ease rather than feeling it. I heard a door open and close. I sat with that for a moment. Then I ordered dinner. My sister poured wine. Irene told a story about a board meeting in 1998 that had ended with someone throwing a binder, and we laughed, genuinely laughed, and I thought, I am going to be completely fine. The next morning, Saturday, my birthday, we were in the lobby having breakfast when they came down. I want to be precise about what happened because I've told this story before, and people always expect something cinematic. They expect a scene. There wasn't a scene. He saw me from across the lobby. He stopped walking. The color left his face in a way I had never seen before and have not seen since. It was not guilt exactly. It was the specific expression of a person watching a structure they built collapse because they never checked the foundation. She was standing slightly behind him. She didn't know who I was yet. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked back down at my coffee. Irene, without looking up from her own coffee, said pleasantly, "Good morning." He said nothing. He steered her back toward the elevator. I did not watch them go. My sister put her hand over mine on the table. "Happy birthday," she said. I said, "Thank you." And I meant it. Here is what happened in the 6 weeks after that morning. In roughly the order it happened, I filed for divorce. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, not community property, which meant my attorney was very glad I had restructured my business documentation when I had. My firm was treated as my separate property. The jointly held assets were divided. My husband, it turned out, had very few assets that were truly his own. The $22,000 in the secondary account was disclosed and factored into the settlement. He did not contest this. I kept the house. He moved into an apartment in Durham. Justine, as far as I know, still works at his firm. That wasn't my problem to solve. What I want to tell you is that the most brutal part of all of it was not finding the calendar invite. It was not seeing his face in that lobby. It was a conversation that happened 3 weeks into the divorce proceedings when he called me, not through his attorney, just called me, on my cell phone at 9 p.m. and said, "I just want you to know that I never meant for it to get this far." I held the phone for a moment, then I said, "I know you didn't." And that was the truest thing either of us said to each other in probably the last 2 years of our marriage, and we both knew it. And I hung up and sat in my living room with Harold, the beagle, and the quiet of a house that was finally entirely mine. People ask me, when I tell this story, people always ask why I didn't confront him sooner, why the planning, why the patience. Here is the honest answer: because I had built something real, and I had made the mistake for 9 years of building it next to someone who needed to diminish it in order to feel tall. And by the time I understood that, I was standing in my kitchen at midnight looking at a calendar invite, and I had exactly one chance to make sure that when I walked away with everything I had built intact. The confrontation would have felt good for about 11 seconds. The planning felt good for the rest of my life. I did not need him to feel sorry. I did not need him to understand. What I needed was the clean legal separation of what was mine from what was never really ours to begin with. That's what I got. The firm turned 9 years old in February. We brought on 2 new senior consultants in March. Irene joined the advisory board, her idea, not mine, which is how I knew it was real. My sister came up for a long weekend in April and we went hiking in the mountains, and she made fun of my rain jacket the entire time, and it was one of the better weekends I'd had in years. Harold is still fine. He has a new habit of sleeping on my husband's old side of the bed, which I've decided not to correct. There is a version of this story where I'm the sad one, where the betrayal is the headline and the grief is the point. But that's not the story I lived. I saw the calendar invite. I made a plan. I walked into that lobby on my birthday with my sister and the woman who taught me what it meant to build something worth protecting, and I drank my coffee. And I let him see that I had never once needed him to complete me. The rest was paperwork. The morning I checked into room 214, I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. I just knew I was done doing the wrong one. That's the part nobody talks about. The moment before the plan. When you're sitting in your car in a hotel parking lot in the North Carolina foothills, and you have to decide who you're going to be from this point forward. I had spent 9 years being someone's wife in the way he needed me to be one. Quietly, conveniently, available to be proud of him, and invisible when the situation called for it. And somewhere in those 9 years, I had let that happen. Not because I was weak, but because I genuinely believed that love meant making room. Even when the room kept getting smaller. What I understand now is that there's a difference between making room and disappearing. I crossed that line slowly. The way you don't notice a room getting darker until you realize you can no longer read. The thing that saved me wasn't finding the calendar invite. It was what I did in the 3 weeks after. I didn't react. I thought. I called the right people. I read the documents I should have read years earlier. I made sure that what I had built, 10 years of work, of client relationships, of showing up even when I didn't want to, was protected. That discipline, the ability to feel something devastating and still think clearly, is not something anyone is born with. I had to learn it the hard way, through late nights and difficult clients and years of solving problems that had no clean answer. That same intelligence I had applied to my business, I finally applied to my own life. And then there's Irene. 71 years old, 2 companies built from nothing. A divorce behind her that she described without bitterness or drama, just clarity. When I called her, she didn't say "I'm so sorry." She said, "What do you need from me specifically?" That distinction matters more than I can explain. She modeled something I had forgotten, that a person of genuine character doesn't collapse around other people's pain. She stands in it with them and asks a useful question. My sister drove 3 hours without hesitation. My best friend said we, before I even finished the sentence. These women were not accessories to what happened that weekend. They were the point of it. Because here's the truth about what my husband did wrong. And I'm not talking about the affair. People fail each other in marriages. That's human. What he did wrong was believe that my success was something he was owed a share of, and that my competence was an inconvenience to his story about himself. He made himself smaller by trying to make me smaller. That's the real cause and effect of it. Not punishment from the universe, just the natural result of building your identity on someone else's diminishment. Eventually, they stop being diminished, and you have nothing left to stand on. I kept the house. I kept the firm. I kept Harold, who has no idea any of this happened, and remains deeply committed to the left side of the bed. What I lost was the version of myself who waited for someone else to decide her worth. I don't miss her. She was doing her best, but she was exhausted, and she deserved better than what she was settling for. The rest was paperwork. Important paperwork. But still,